cameras flashed as James Wilson stood awkwardly beside his homemade compost system, surrounded by environmental journalists and sustainability experts from 3 continents. A woman with millions of followers smiled beside him, her arm around his weathered shoulders. 6 months ago, he had been on the brink of losing everything: his family farm, drowning in debt, his spirits broken after years of drought and market volatility. Now corporations were offering him sponsorships. Universities wanted to study his methods, and a major foundation had just awarded him a grant that would save his land. All because he had shown a stranger his humble pile of rotting vegetables, completely unaware that she could change his life with a single post. Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are the ones born from necessity, not privilege, she told the crowd gathered on his once failing farm. James wasn't trying to save the planet. He was just trying to survive. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning James first met Sophia Chen had started like any other on Wildroot Farm. He had risen before dawn, his joints aching from decades of physical labor, to feed the small collection of animals that remained after he'd been forced to sell most of his livestock. The farm had been in his family for 4 generations, a modest 60 acres of rolling hills and fertile soil that had once produced enough to support his grandparents, parents, wife, and 2 children. The times had changed, and not for the better. James pulled on his worn boots and stepped out into the crisp spring air. The first golden rays of sunrise were just beginning to illuminate the weathered red barn and the small farmhouse where he now lived alone. His wife, Eleanor, had passed away 3 years ago from cancer, and his children had moved away to cities where job prospects were more promising than the uncertain future of a small family farm. His son worked as an accountant in Chicago, and his daughter was a nurse in Denver. They called regularly and visited when they could, but they had their own lives now, far from the rural struggles of their childhood home. As he made his way to the chicken coop, James mentally calculated how much money remained in his account after paying last month's property taxes. Not enough, he knew that much. The bank had given him extensions on his loan payments twice now, but their patience was wearing thin. Corporate farming conglomerates had been buying up failed family farms all across the county, turning them into industrialized operations that bore little resemblance to the sustainable practices his father and grandfather had taught him. "Morning, ladies," he called to the small flock of heritage breed chickens that scratched and pecked in their enclosure. They were Rhode Island Reds, known for their hardiness and consistent egg production. James scattered feed from a bucket, watching as the birds flocked around him in a flurry of russet feathers. These chickens were one of his few remaining sources of steady income. He sold their eggs at the farmer's market in town every Saturday, along with whatever seasonal vegetables he could coax from his garden plots. After tending to the chickens, James moved on to his modest vegetable garden. Unlike the vast monoculture fields that dominated modern agriculture, his garden was a diverse ecosystem of companion plants, cover crops, and carefully planned rotations. He had learned these methods from his father, who had learned them from his father before him, knowledge passed down through generations of farmers who understood that working with nature, rather than against it, was the key to long-term agricultural success. But knowledge alone couldn't overcome the economic realities of modern farming. The small-scale, diversified approach that had sustained his family for generations simply couldn't compete with the economies of scale enjoyed by industrial operations. Every year, it became harder to make ends meet, and James had begun to accept that he might be the last Wilson to work this land. As he knelt to pull weeds from around his tomato plants, he noticed a figure moving along the public trail that bordered the eastern edge of his property. Hikers and outdoor enthusiasts occasionally used the trail, which connected to a state park about 3 miles north, but it was unusual to see someone this early in the morning. The figure paused at the fence line, seeming to study his garden setup with interest. James straightened, his back protesting the movement. The person at the fence was a woman, perhaps in her mid-30s, dressed in practical outdoor gear hiking pants, a light jacket, and sturdy boots. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and carried a professional-looking camera around her neck. When she noticed him looking in her direction, she raised a hand in greeting. "Good morning," she called, her voice carrying easily across the quiet farm. "Sorry to intrude. I was just admiring your garden setup." James was not by nature a particularly social person, especially with strangers. But years of participating in farmers' markets had taught him the value of being approachable. He waved back and made his way toward the fence, curious about this early morning visitor. "Morning," he replied, as he drew closer. "You're up and about early." "I'm camping at the state park," she explained, gesturing northward. "I'm an early riser, especially when I'm outdoors. Something about waking up with the sun feels right, you know?" James nodded. He had lived his entire life by the rhythms of daylight and seasons, rising with the sun and retiring not long after it set. It was a pattern so ingrained in his body that he rarely needed an alarm clock, even in winter when the days were short. "I couldn't help noticing your garden," the woman continued. "The layout is fascinating. It's not the typical rows you see in most farms." James glanced back at his garden plots, seeing them suddenly through a stranger's eyes. What was second nature to him might indeed look unusual to someone accustomed to conventional agriculture. "It's companion planting," he explained. "Different plants help each other grow when they're put together right. Keeps the bugs balanced too, so I don't need much in the way of pesticides." The woman's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's incredibly smart. Do you mind if I ask you more about it? I'm actually very interested in sustainable agriculture." Something about her enthusiasm was disarming. James wasn't used to people showing much interest in his old-fashioned farming methods. Most of the younger farmers in the area had embraced modern techniques, viewing his approach as outdated and inefficient. "I suppose I've got time for a few questions," he said, surprising himself with his willingness to engage. "I'm James, by the way. James Wilson." "I'm Sophia Chen," she replied with a warm smile, extending her hand across the fence. Her handshake was firm and confident. "It's a pleasure to meet you, James. You can come around through the gate if you want a closer look," he offered, pointing to a small side entrance about 50 yards down the fence line. "Just be sure to close it behind you. Don't need the chickens deciding to explore." Sophia laughed. "I'll be careful," she promised, already moving toward the gate. As she made her way around, James found himself straightening his worn canvas work shirt and brushing soil from his hands. It had been a while since he'd given anyone a tour of the farm. His children's visits were infrequent, and few locals showed much interest in his operations. There was something refreshing about Sophia's curiosity, a reminder of a time when farming knowledge was valued and shared within communities. When Sophia rejoined him on his side of the fence, he noticed details he hadn't observed from a distance. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, and though her outdoor clothing was practical, it was also of noticeably good quality. The camera around her neck was high-end, the kind used by serious photographers, not casual tourists. She had intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with keen observation. "So, you're camping at the park?" James asked, as he led her toward the garden. "Just passing through or staying a while?" "I'm here for about a week," Sophia replied. "I try to spend time in natural settings whenever I can. It helps clear my head and gives me perspective." "Perspective on what?" "On how we live, what's important," she said thoughtfully. "It's easy to lose sight of the basics when you're caught up in the noise of everyday life." James nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Despite his financial troubles, there was a clarity to his existence on the farm that he suspected was missing from many modern lives. As they approached the garden, Sophia's attention was drawn to a series of large wooden bins set up along the edge of the growing area. Some were covered with black plastic, others with burlap, and a few were open to the elements, revealing dark, rich soil in various stages of decomposition. "Is that your composting system?" she asked, her interest clearly piqued. James felt a flicker of pride. His composting setup was one of his most successful innovations, cobbled together from scavenged materials and refined through years of trial and error. "It is," he confirmed. "Nothing fancy, but it does the job. May I see it?" Sophia asked, already moving closer, her camera coming up as if she might want to take pictures. James was surprised by her enthusiasm for what was essentially a glorified collection of rotting organic matter, but he nodded his permission. Help yourself. Though I don't know what's so interesting about a pile of decomposing vegetables. Sophia approached the nearest bin, which contained fresh kitchen scraps and garden waste that had been added within the past few days. The next bin held material that was a few weeks old, already beginning to break down into a dark, crumbly substance. The progression continued through the series of containers, culminating in the final bin, which contained fully finished compost-rich, black soil teeming with earthworms and beneficial microorganisms. "This is brilliant," Sophia said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "You've created a sequential processing system. Most home composters just have one pile that they turn occasionally, but you're maximizing efficiency by having multiple stages." James hadn't thought of it in those terms. For him, it had simply been a practical solution to a practical problem: how to create enough high-quality soil amendments to maintain his garden's fertility without spending money he didn't have on commercial fertilizers. "It's nothing special," he said, slightly embarrassed by her praise. "Just seemed like the sensible way to do it." "But that's exactly what makes it special," Sophia insisted. "You've developed a highly effective system using minimal resources. Do you mind if I take some photos? I'd love to document this setup." "I suppose that would be all right," James agreed, wondering why anyone would want photographs of compost bins. "Though, I can't imagine they'd make for very interesting pictures." Sophia smiled as she raised her camera. "You'd be surprised what people find interesting these days," she said cryptically, adjusting her lens and beginning to shoot from various angles. As she photographed the compost system, she asked detailed questions about his process. How often did he turn each bin? What materials did he include? How did he maintain the proper carbon-to-nitrogen ratio? How long did it take for materials to fully decompose? How did he use the finished product? James answered each question thoroughly, finding himself warming to the conversation. It had been a long time since anyone had shown such genuine interest in his farming practices. Sophia seemed to understand the value of what he was doing, appreciating the wisdom in methods that many modern farmers had abandoned in favor of chemical shortcuts. "Would you mind showing me the rest of your operation?" she asked, once she had thoroughly documented the compost system. "I'd love to see how you're applying these principles throughout the farm." For the next 2 hours, James led Sophia on a comprehensive tour of Wildroot Farm. He showed her his chicken coop, where he had designed a deep litter system that required minimal cleaning while producing excellent fertilizer for his fields. He explained his water conservation methods, including rain barrels and a gravity-fed irrigation system that utilized the natural slope of the land. He demonstrated how he had arranged his crops to create natural windbreaks and maximize sun exposure. Throughout the tour, Sophia asked insightful questions and took numerous photographs, occasionally making voice notes on her phone. Her knowledge of agricultural principles impressed Jameshi. Wasn't just a casual observer, but someone who clearly understood the science behind sustainable farming practices. "You seem to know quite a bit about all this," he remarked, as they walked along the edge of a small apple orchard, where he had established a guild of complementary plants beneath the trees. "I've studied it," Sophia replied, though more from a theoretical perspective. "Seeing these principles applied so effectively in a real-world setting is invaluable. You've created something remarkable here, James." He shook his head, looking around at his modest farm. "I'm just doing what farmers have done for generations, before all the chemicals and massive machinery took over. Nothing remarkable about it." "That's where you're wrong," Sophia said gently. "What you're preserving here is increasingly rare and incredibly valuable. You're maintaining agricultural knowledge that's in danger of being lost, and you're demonstrating that it's still viable in the modern world." James hadn't thought of his methods as something worth preserving. To him, they were simply the most practical approaches given his limited resources. He couldn't afford the expensive inputs required by conventional agriculture, so he had stuck with the low-cost, low-impact methods passed down through his family. As they completed their circuit of the farm and returned to the garden where they had started, James realized that the morning had slipped away. The sun was high now, and he had chores waiting that couldn't be postponed. "I should get back to work," he said, gesturing toward the barn. Got animals to tend to and repairs that won't fix themselves? Of course, Sophia nodded. I've taken up too much of your time already. Thank you so much for showing me around. You have no idea how valuable this has been, eh? It was nice talking to someone who appreciates the old ways, James admitted. Most people these days think I'm just being stubborn, not keeping up with the times. What you're doing here is more forward-thinking than most modern agriculture, Sophia said firmly. The future of farming will look more like your methods than the chemical-dependent systems that dominate now. Resources are getting scarcer, and approaches like yours will become necessary, not optional. Her words struck James as both kind and slightly naive. He knew the economic realities that had pushed most farmers toward industrialization. His methods might be more sustainable environmentally, but they hadn't proven sustainable financially. His mounting debts were evidence of that. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your camping trip, he said, extending his hand. It was nice meeting you, Sophia. Likewise, James, she replied, shaking his hand warmly. And thank you again for being so generous with your knowledge. It means more than you know. With that, she made her way back to the gate, carefully latching it behind her as promised. James watched her walk back toward the trail, camera still in hand, before turning toward the barn to resume his daily chores. The encounter had been a pleasant diversion, but he didn't expect to see Sophia Chen again. Nor did he imagine that their brief interaction would have any lasting impact on his life. In this, James Wilson was entirely, profoundly wrong. 3 days later, James was in town for his weekly supply run when he noticed people giving him strange looks. Riverton was a small community of just under 5,000 residents, and James knew most of the locals by name. He wasn't the most social man in the county, but he was a familiar figure at the farmer's market and the farm supply store. The curious glances and whispered conversations that followed him through the grocery store were unusual and slightly unnerving. It wasn't until he reached the checkout that he got an explanation. Martha Donovan, who had been running the register at Riverton Market for as long as anyone could remember, greeted him with more enthusiasm than usual. "James Wilson, you're practically famous," she exclaimed, as she began scanning his modest selection of items: coffee, flour, a few canned goods he couldn't produce himself. "What are you talking about, Martha?" he asked, confused. "You haven't seen it? It's all over the internet. That fancy environmentalist woman's post about your farm. My daughter showed it to me this morning. It's got millions of views already." James felt a strange sensation in the pit of his stomach. Environmentalist woman? Asian lady, very pretty, takes lots of pictures, Martha supplied, bagging his groceries. She's apparently some big deal in the sustainability world. Has one of those internet shows or channels or whatever they call them. She did a whole feature on your compost system and your farming methods. People are going crazy for it. James's mind immediately went to Sophia, the curious camper who had spent hours asking him questions and photographing his farm. "Sophia Chen?" he asked, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "That's the one," Martha confirmed. "My daughter says she has millions of followers. People come from all over to visit the places she features. You might want to prepare yourself for some visitors, James." James paid for his groceries in a daze, thanked Martha, and headed straight home, his mind racing. Who exactly was Sophia Chen, and what had she said about his farm? He wasn't particularly internet savvy. He had an old computer at home that he used primarily for email and occasional video calls with his children, but he didn't participate in social media or follow online personalities. When he arrived back at the farm, he immediately noticed something unusual. 3 cars were parked along the road near his property, and several people with cameras were standing by his fence, seemingly photographing his garden from a distance. James drove past them without stopping, pulling up to his farmhouse with a growing sense of unease. Inside, he booted up his ancient desktop computer and, after several frustrating minutes waiting for it to connect to his slow rural internet service, searched for Sophia Chen Sustainability. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Sophia Chen wasn't just someone with an interest in sustainable agriculture. She was one of the most influential voices in the global environmental movement. Her official website described her as an environmental activist, sustainability consultant, and content creator with a focus on regenerative systems and traditional ecological knowledge. She had over 5 million followers across various social media platforms, had given TED talks, advised corporations on sustainability initiatives, and consulted with governments on environmental policy. Her online series, Planet Forward, documented innovative approaches to sustainability around the world and had won several awards for environmental journalism. With shaking hands, James navigated to her most recent post, which was indeed about Wildroot Farm, his farm. The feature included stunning photographs of his compost system, garden, and water conservation methods, along with detailed explanations of how his approaches could be adapted for both rural and urban settings. Sophia's respectful, almost reverential description of his farming practices made them sound not like the desperate adaptations of a financially struggling farmer, but like the visionary work of an environmental pioneer. James Wilson isn't trying to revolutionize agriculture, she had written. He's simply carrying forward the wisdom of generations of farmers who understood that working with natural systems, rather than against them, is the most efficient and resilient approach. What makes his methods remarkable isn't their novelty, but their timelessness and their perfect relevance to our current environmental challenges. The post had indeed gone viral, with hundreds of thousands of shares and millions of views in just 3 days. Comments poured in from around the world, with people expressing admiration for James's methods and asking detailed questions about how to implement similar systems in their own gardens or farms. As James read through the comments, his doorbell rang, a rare enough occurrence that it startled him. When he opened the door, he found a young couple standing on his porch, looking slightly nervous but excited. "Mr. Wilson?" the woman asked. "We're so sorry to bother you at home, but we saw Sophia Chen's feature on your farm, and we were driving through the area. We're starting our own small homestead in Virginia, and we'd love to learn more about your composting system if you have a few minutes." End quote. James stared at them, momentarily speechless. These strangers had come to his home because of something they had seen online. The realization was both flattering and deeply unsettling. "I wasn't expecting visitors," he managed finally. "We understand completely," the man said quickly. "We should have called ahead or something. We can come back another time if that would be better." James considered turning them away, but found himself oddly reluctant to do so. There was something genuine in their interest, a sincere desire to learn that reminded him of his own early days of farming, when he had eagerly absorbed knowledge from older, more experienced agriculturalists. "No, it's all right," he heard himself saying. "I can show you around for a bit, just let me get my boots." That first unexpected visit turned out to be just the beginning. Over the next several days, a steady stream of visitors arrived at Wildroot Farm. Environmental enthusiasts, aspiring farmers, journalists, and even a few academic researchers from the state university's agricultural program. Most were respectful, calling ahead or sending emails to request tours or interviews, but some simply showed up at his gate, hoping for a glimpse of the sustainable farming methods that had captured the internet's imagination. James did his best to accommodate the interest, setting aside specific hours for tours and limiting access to certain areas of the farm. Despite his initial discomfort with the attention, he found himself warming to the role of educator. There was something deeply satisfying about sharing knowledge that had been passed down through generations of his family, seeing it valued by people who recognized its relevance to contemporary challenges. A week after Sophia's post went live, James received an email from her. She apologized for not revealing her full identity during their meeting, explaining that she often traveled incognito to capture authentic experiences without the pressure that sometimes came with her public persona. She expressed hope that the attention her feature had brought to his farm was more positive than disruptive, and offered to speak with him if he had any concerns. James composed a careful reply, assuring her that, while the sudden attention had been unexpected, he wasn't angry about it. He admitted that the interest in his farming methods was actually somewhat gratifying, though he was still adjusting to the idea of Wildroot Farm as a point of public interest. What he didn't mention in his email was the most surprising development of all. Several of his visitors had offered to pay for his time and knowledge. A permaculture design collective wanted to contract with him as a consultant. A seed-saving organization had offered to buy breeding stock from his heritage vegetable varieties. A sustainable agriculture magazine wanted to commission a series of articles detailing his methods. For the first time in years, James was seeing potential income sources that might help keep his farm afloat without compromising his values. The day after he replied to Sophia, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, he was surprised to hear her voice. "James, it's Sophia Chin. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I wanted to check in personally about everything that's happening." "It's fine," he assured her, settling into his worn armchair. "Though, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all." "I can imagine," she said sympathetically. "I should have been more upfront about who I was and what I was doing. That's on me, and I'm truly sorry." "No harm done," James replied, finding that he meant it. "People seem genuinely interested in learning. Can't fault them for that." "They are," Sophia confirmed. "Your approaches resonate with people who are looking for more sustainable ways to live. But that's actually not the only reason I'm calling. There's something specific I wanted to discuss with you." James listened as she explained that the Gaia Foundation, a major environmental nonprofit, had expressed interest in featuring Wildroot Farm as a case study in their regenerative agriculture initiative. The foundation offered grants to farmers who demonstrated effective, replicable methods of sustainable food production, with the goal of creating a network of model farms that could serve as educational resources. "They're particularly interested in your low-tech, low-cost approaches," Sophia explained. "Most of the showcase farms in their network use expensive equipment and infrastructure that's out of reach for many farmers, especially in developing regions. Your methods could be implemented almost anywhere, with minimal investment." "I'm not sure what I could offer a big foundation like that," James said doubtfully. "Everything I do here is pretty basic." "That's exactly the point," Sophia insisted. "You're achieving remarkable results with minimal inputs. That's invaluable knowledge in a world where most farmers don't have access to fancy technology or unlimited resources." She explained that the foundation would provide a significant grant to support and document his practices, with no strings attached beyond allowing occasional educational visits and sharing his methods. The money could be used however he saw fit to maintain or improve his farm. "How significant are we talking?" James asked cautiously, financial pressure never far from his mind. When Sophia named the figure, James nearly dropped the phone. It was enough to pay off his outstanding loans and make crucial repairs to the farm infrastructure, with plenty left over as operating capital. "There must be some kind of catch," he said, his farmer's skepticism kicking in. "No catch," Sophia assured him. "The foundation wants to preserve and promote sustainable agricultural knowledge. Your farm is a perfect example of the kind of operation they want to support. I've worked with them for years. They're legitimate and well-respected in the environmental community." End quote. James promised to think about it, thanked Sophia for the opportunity, and ended the call. He spent the rest of the day in a state of disbelief, alternating between excitement at the potential financial lifeline and suspicion that something this good couldn't possibly be real. That evening, he called his son, Robert, in Chicago. Robert had always been the practical one in the family, with a head for business and a healthy dose of caution. If anyone could spot a potential scam or hidden drawback, it would be him. "Have you looked up this foundation, Dad?" Robert asked after James had explained the situation. "Are they legitimate?" "Sophia says they are," James replied. "But I feel better if you could check them out. You're better with the internet than I am." "I'll look into it right away," Robert promised. "And I'll call you back tonight." True to his word, Robert called back a few hours later, his voice animated with unusual excitement. "Dad, this is the real deal. The Gaia Foundation is one of the most respected environmental organizations in the world. They have an endowment of over $100 million and a stellar reputation for their work in sustainable agriculture." "So, you think I should accept?" James asked, still uncertain. "Absolutely," Robert said, without hesitation. This is an incredible opportunity. And Dad, I looked up this Sophia Chen person too. She's a major figure in the environmental world. The fact that she's taken an interest in your farm is a big deal. Robert's endorsement went a long way toward easing James's concerns. His son had always been cautious with money and skeptical of anything that seemed too good to be true. If he thought the foundation's offer was legitimate, he probably was. The next morning, James called Sophia back and accepted the offer from the Gaia Foundation. She seemed genuinely pleased and promised to put him in touch with the foundation's program director to work out the details. Within a week, paperwork had been signed, and the first installment of the grant had been deposited in James's account, enough to immediately pay off the most pressing of his outstanding loans. But the foundation grant was just the beginning. As word of Wildroot Farms spread through environmental and agricultural circles, more opportunities presented themselves. A major organic seed company offered to partner with James to grow heirloom varieties adapted to his region's specific conditions. A sustainable agriculture institute asked him to participate in a research project studying the effectiveness of traditional farming methods in building soil health. A popular outdoor clothing company, known for its environmental activism, approached him about a potential sponsorship that would feature his farm in their marketing materials. Each opportunity brought not just financial benefits, but a growing sense of validation. Methods that James had once feared might be viewed as outdated or inefficient were now being recognized as forward-thinking and innovative. Knowledge that he had feared might die with him was being documented, shared, and implemented by a new generation of farmers and gardeners. 6 months after Sophia's initial visit, Wildroot Farm hosted its first official workshop, a weekend-long intensive on composting and soil fertility management. 30 participants from across the country paid to camp on James's land and learn directly from him. The event was so successful that he immediately began planning additional workshops on water conservation, companion planting, and heritage livestock management. The income from these various sources didn't make James wealthy by conventional standards, but it transformed his financial situation entirely. For the first time in decades, he wasn't just scraping by, hoping to postpone the inevitable loss of his family's land. He was building savings, making investments in farm infrastructure, and even considering hiring help to expand his operations. More significant than the financial turnaround, however, was the shift in James's sense of purpose. After Eleanor's death and his children's departure, he had continued farming largely out of obligation to family tradition and a lack of alternatives. Now, he found himself energized by the opportunity to share his knowledge with others who genuinely valued it. His daily work took on new meaning, as he recognized its significance beyond his own subsistency, was preserving and transmitting agricultural wisdom that might otherwise have been lost. On a crisp autumn morning, almost exactly 7 months after their first meeting, Sophia Chen returned to Wildroot Farm. She arrived not as an anonymous camper this time, but as herself the influential environmentalist whose feature had transformed James's life. She came with a small film crew to document the changes at the farm for a follow-up piece and to interview James about his journey from struggling farmer to recognized sustainability expert. James greeted her at the newly restored front gate, which now bore a hand-carved wooden sign reading, "Wildroot Farm, Sustainable Agriculture since 1923. The property itself had undergone visible transformations. The barn had a new roof, the farmhouse had been repainted, and the garden areas had expanded considerably. A small parking area had been established for workshop participants, and a new outbuilding served as a classroom and processing facility for the heritage seeds James was now producing commercially. "This is incredible, James," Sophia said as he led her and her crew on a tour of the revitalized farm. "You've done so much in such a short time." "Couldn't have done it without your help," he acknowledged, more comfortable now with giving and receiving credit where it was due. "Your post opened doors I didn't even know existed. I just shined a light on what was already here," she insisted. "You built all of this. Over generations. I'm just glad more people get to learn from it now." As they walked the property, James shared stories of the various projects and partnerships that had developed over the past months. He introduced Sophia to Maria Gonzalez, a young aspiring farmer who had attended one of his early workshops and now worked as his assistant, learning the intricacies of sustainable agriculture while helping to manage grass. The farm's expanding operations. Maria's going to take over the educational programs eventually, James explained as the young woman expertly demonstrated soil testing techniques for Sophia's camera crew. She has a degree in environmental science and a natural gift for teaching. Brings in perspectives I never thought about. That's wonderful, Sophia said warmly. Ensuring this knowledge continues to the next generation is so important. After the formal tour and interviews were complete, James invited Sophia to stay for dinner. They sat on the farmhouse porch as the sun set over the fields, sharing a meal prepared almost entirely from ingredients grown on the farm. "I've been meaning to ask you something," James said as they enjoyed slices of apple pie made with fruit from his orchard. "That first day, when you came across my farm, was it really just chance? Or were you looking for something like this to feature?" Sophia smiled. "A bit of both, to be honest. I was genuinely camping in the area, taking some personal time between projects, but I'm always looking for authentic examples of sustainability in practice. When I saw your garden from the trail, I knew immediately there was something special about it. The diversity, the thoughtful layout was clear. This wasn't a conventional operation. And you didn't tell me who you were because I wanted to see the real thing, not a performance," she explained. "In my position, people sometimes show me what they think I want to see. Or they get nervous and can't explain their work naturally. The most valuable knowledge often comes from people who aren't trying to impress anyone. They're just doing what works, what makes sense to them." James nodded, understanding her reasoning. "Well, I'm glad you found your way here, however it happened. It's been quite a journey these past few months. How do your children feel about all this?" Sophia asked. "About the farm's new direction?" James smiled. "They're coming around." Robert was skeptical at first. He's an accountant, always looking for the catch. But now that he sees the financial stability, he's supportive. Even talking about moving back to help manage the business side of things. "And your daughter?" "Lisa's thrilled," James said, his voice warm with paternal pride. "She's always been passionate about environmental issues, but didn't see a way to connect that with the family farm. Now she's planning to set up a health education program here, teaching people about the connections between sustainable agriculture and wellness. She's a nurse, you know." "That sounds perfect," Sophia said. "A true family legacy, evolving for new times." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the clear country sky, their conversation turned to the future. Sophia shared stories of other traditional farmers she had encountered around the world, indigenous communities in the Amazon preserving centuries-old agroforestry techniques, nomadic herders in Mongolia maintaining sustainable grazing practices, rice farmers in Japan continuing methods that had sustained their villages for generations. "You're part of something much bigger than just this farm," she told James. "All over the world, people are recognizing that many of our advanced agricultural methods are actually taking us backward in terms of sustainability. The knowledge held by traditional farmers like you is becoming recognized as vital to our future." "I never thought of it that way," James admitted. "I was just doing what my father taught me, adapting it as best I could to changing conditions." "That's exactly what makes it valuable," Sophia insisted. "It's practical knowledge tested over generations, not theoretical ideas developed in isolation from real-world conditions." Before she left that evening, Sophia presented James with a proposal. The success of Wildgroot Farm as a case study had inspired her to develop a more comprehensive project documenting traditional agricultural knowledge around the United States. She wanted James to serve as a consultant, helping to identify and connect with other farmers who maintain sustainable practices passed down through generations. "There are people like you all across the country," she explained. "Farmers who have held on to traditional methods despite economic pressure to industrialize. But they're often isolated, unaware that their knowledge has tremendous value in our changing world. I want to create a network, connecting these knowledge keepers and giving them the recognition and support they deserve." End quote. The idea resonated deeply with James. Throughout his life, he had watched as traditional farmers in his community had gradually disappeared, their lands absorbed by industrial operations or commercial development. Each loss had felt like more than just a change in land use. It was the disappearance of practical wisdom accumulated over generations of working with the land. "I'd be honored to help," he said simply. "I might not know many folks outside the county, but I know who around here is still farming the old ways." "That's a perfect start," Sophia assured him. "Local connections are the strongest foundation. We'll build from there." As they said their goodbyes, James found himself reflecting on the strange turns his life had taken. 7 months ago, he had been a struggling farmer on the verge of losing everything, isolated and uncertain about the future. Now, he stood at the center of a growing movement, his knowledge valued and his farm secure. "Thank you," he said, as Sophia prepared to leave. "Not just for what you did for me and my farm, but for helping me see that these old ways still matter." "They don't just matter, James," she replied with a warm smile. "They're essential, and now more people will understand why." After Sophia's follow-up feature was published, bringing even more attention to Wildgood Farm and its revival, James found himself adapting to yet another new role: mentor. Young farmers and agricultural students began seeking apprenticeships, eager to learn directly from him over extended periods. With Maria's help, he established a formal internship program, providing housing in a renovated outbuilding and a structured curriculum that combined hands-on work with theoretical understanding. The first cohort of 5 interns arrived in the early spring, a diverse group of young people united by their interest in sustainable agriculture. There was Y, an environmental science graduate from California; Darius, a former urban professional from Atlanta seeking a career change; Amara, whose family had farmed in Nigeria before immigrating to the United States; Jackson, a local young man whose family had lost their own farm to foreclosure; and Layla, an engineer interested in developing appropriate technology for small-scale agriculture. James initially worried about his ability to teach effectively. He had always learned by doing, not from books or formal instruction. But he found that his practical experience, combined with Maria's more academic background, created a balanced educational approach that engaged the interns on multiple levels. They spent mornings working directly in the fields, garden, and compost areas, learning through physical experience. Afternoons were devoted to more structured learning: soil science, plant biology, weather patterns, and the economic aspects of sustainable farming. "The most important thing to understand," James told the interns during their first week, "is that everything on this farm is connected. What we do in one area affects every other area, for better or worse. Our job isn't to force the land to produce, it's to create conditions where production happens naturally." This holistic perspective became the foundation of the Wildgood Farm educational philosophy. Rather than teaching isolated techniques, James and Maria emphasized understanding the farm as an ecosystem, with each element supporting others in a complex web of relationships. This approach resonated with the interns, many of whom had become disillusioned with the reductionist methods taught in conventional agricultural education. As the interns settled into life at Wildgood, James found himself energized by their questions and perspectives. They challenged him to articulate knowledge he had previously held intuitively, forcing him to examine and refine practices he had taken for granted. Their diverse backgrounds brought new ideas to the farm-wise understanding of Asian-intensive gardening techniques, Amara's knowledge of tropical permaculture methods, Layla's engineering insights for water management. One evening, after a long day of transplanting seedlings into the early summer garden, James sat with the interns around a campfire near the orchard. As they roasted vegetables harvested that day, the conversation turned to the broader implications of sustainable agriculture. "What you're teaching us isn't just about farming," Darius observed thoughtfully. "It's about a different way of relating to the world. In my previous career, everything was about maximizing profit, treating resources as things to be used up. Here, we're learning to be part of a system, not just extracting from it." "That's exactly right," James nodded. "My grandfather used to say that a good farmer leaves the land better than he found it, not just maintaining it, but improving it for future generations." "But how do we scale this?" "Why?" Layla asked, the engineer in her always looking for broader applications. These methods work beautifully here. But how do we apply them widely enough to make a difference globally? It was a question James had been pondering himself, especially since beginning his work with Sophia on identifying and connecting other traditional farmers. I think that's the wrong question, he said after a moment's reflection. We're so used to thinking that bigger is better, that standardization is the goal. But what if the answer isn't one huge solution, but thousands of small, locally adapted ones? Like a mosaic. Why suggested? Why suggested? Each piece unique, but forming a complete picture together. Exactly, James agreed. What works here in Pennsylvania might not work exactly the same way in California or Nigeria or anywhere else. But the principles working with natural systems, closing resource loops, building soil health, those translate everywhere. They just look different in different places. End quote. This concept of adaptive sustainability core principles, expressed through locally appropriate practices, became another cornerstone of the Wildroot approach. James began emphasizing this perspective in his workshops and consulting work, encouraging participants to focus on understanding the underlying principles of sustainable agriculture rather than simply replicating specific techniques. As word of Wildroot Farm's educational program spread, James received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Catherine Patel, the Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences at the State University. She expressed interest in establishing a formal partnership between Wildroot Farm and the university, creating opportunities for student field experiences and collaborative research projects. Academic agriculture has become too divorced from practical farming, Dr. Patel explained during her visit to the farm. Our students learn plenty of theory, but have limited exposure to functioning agricultural systems, especially ones operating outside the conventional model. What you're doing here fills a critical gap in their education. The partnership agreement they eventually developed allowed advanced undergraduate and graduate students to participate in extended residencies at Wildroot, receiving academic credit while gaining hands-on experience in sustainable agriculture. In return, university researchers would help document and analyze the farm's methods, providing data that could validate traditional practices through the lens of modern science. This academic connection brought Wildroot Farm to the attention of policymakers at the state level. Pennsylvania, like many states, was beginning to recognize the environmental and economic costs of industrial agriculture, soil degradation, water pollution, rural community decline, and vulnerability to climate disruptions. Sustainable farming operations like Wildroot offered potential solutions to these mounting challenges. State Senator Howard Marshall, chair of the Agricultural Committee, visited Wildroot Farm on a warm day in late summer. A former conventional farmer himself, Marshall approached the tour with polite skepticism that gradually transformed into genuine interest as James demonstrated the farm's integrated systems. You're getting these yields without chemical inputs? The senator asked, as they walked through the abundant main garden, where tomato plants heavy with ripening fruit grew alongside a diverse array of vegetables, herbs, and beneficial flowering plants. Haven't used synthetic fertilizers or pesticides in over 40 years, James confirmed. Don't need them when the soil is healthy and the ecosystem is balanced. Senator Marshall knelt to examine the rich, dark earth between the plants. And this soil was marginal when your family acquired the property? That's what my grandfather's journals say, James nodded. Rocky, acidic, nutrient poor, took a generation of careful management to build it up to what you're seeing now. Remarkable, the senator murmured. And your water usage? James led him to the rainwater catchment systems and the gravity-fed irrigation network. We use about a third of the water per acre compared to conventional operations growing similar crops. The healthy soil holds moisture better, and we're careful about when and how we irrigate. By the end of the tour, Senator Marshall was taking notes and asking detailed questions about how Wildroot's methods might be adapted for larger operations. Before leaving, he shared that the state was developing new programs to incentivize sustainable farming practices as part of a broader climate resilience initiative. We've been focusing our support on high-tech solutions, expensive equipment, and complex systems that most farmers can't afford to implement, the senator admitted. What you're demonstrating here is that some of the most effective approaches are actually low-tech and accessible. That's a perspective we need to incorporate into our policy framework. In the months that followed, James found himself increasingly involved in policy discussions at both state and national levels. He testified before agricultural committees, participated in roundtable discussions with environmental agencies, and consulted on the development of grant programs designed to help conventional farmers transition to more sustainable methods. His message remained consistent throughout these engagements. Sustainable agriculture wasn't about returning to a romanticized past or rejecting modern knowledge. It was about integrating traditional wisdom with contemporary understanding, finding a middle path that honored both innovation and experience. The farmers who came before us weren't perfect, he often said in these forums. They made mistakes, just as we do. But they were close observers of natural systems, and they passed down knowledge gained through generations of trial and error. We discard that wisdom at our peril. This balanced perspective, coming from a practicing farmer rather than an academic or activist, resonated with policymakers across the political spectrum. Conservatives appreciated his emphasis on self-reliance and tradition, while progressives valued his focus on environmental stewardship and community resilience. In an era of intense polarization, James found himself in the unusual position of being respected by groups that rarely found common ground. As the second year of Wildroot Farms' transformation drew to a close, James received an invitation that would have seemed inconceivable just a short time earlier. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization wanted him to participate in an international conference on agricultural resilience in the face of climate change. The event would bring together farmers, researchers, and policymakers from around the world to share knowledge and develop collaborative approaches to sustainable food production. When James shared the invitation with his children during their Christmas visit to the farm, his daughter Lisa immediately insisted that he accept. "You have to go, Dad," she urged. "Your perspective needs to be part of this conversation." "I'm not sure what I could contribute to something so global," James said doubtfully. "I'm just a small farmer from Pennsylvania." "That's exactly why you should go," Robert countered. "Most of the world's farmers are small-scale producers, not corporate operations. Your methods are more relevant to their reality than some high-tech solution that requires millions in investment." In the end, it was Maria who convinced him. "The interns and I can handle things here for a couple of weeks," she assured him. "This is too important an opportunity to pass up. Not just for you, but for all the farmers like you whose voices aren't usually heard in these international forums." And so, in early spring, James Wilson, who had rarely traveled beyond neighboring states, found himself in Rome, participating in discussions that would help shape global agricultural policy. The conference brought together an extraordinary diversity of agricultural practitioners: rice farmers from the Philippines, cattle ranchers from Argentina, vegetable growers from Kenya, wheat producers from Ukraine. Despite their different contexts and crops, James was struck by how many of these farmers faced similar challenges: economic pressure to industrialize, climate disruptions affecting traditional growing seasons, difficulty accessing markets that valued sustainable products, and the struggle to interest younger generations in farming careers. During a breakout session focused on knowledge transfer between generations, James shared the story of Wildroot Farms' transformation from a struggling operation to a thriving educational center. He described how valuing traditional knowledge had not only saved his family's land, but had created new economic opportunities through education, seed production, and consulting. "The key was recognizing that what I knew had value," he explained to the assembled farmers and policymakers. "Not just economic value, but cultural and ecological value as well. When we begin to see traditional agricultural knowledge as an asset rather than a liability, we open up possibilities that benefit both the farm and the wider community." A farmer from Mali nodded vigorously. "In my country, young people see traditional farming as backward," he said. "They leave for cities, seeking modern jobs. But then, our ancestral knowledge is lost, and our communities wither. Your model shows another path honoring tradition, while embracing change." Throughout the conference, James participated in discussions, shared meals with farmers from across the globe, and formed connections that would continue long after the formal proceedings ended. On the final day, he was invited to join a working group developing recommendations for integrating traditional agricultural knowledge into climate adaptation strategies. "We need to document these practices before they disappear," argued a researcher from Brazil. "Create a global database of traditional farming methods that scientists can study and quantify." "Documentation is important," James agreed, "but it's not enough. These aren't museum pieces, they are living knowledge systems that need to be practiced to be preserved. We need to create economic conditions where traditional farmers can thrive, not just survive." The resulting recommendations emphasized supporting networks of demonstration farms like Wildroot, developing certification systems that would allow consumers to identify and support traditionally grown products, and establishing mentorship programs connecting elder farmers with younger practitioners. When James returned to Pennsylvania, he brought with him not just new ideas and connections, but a profound sense of being part of a global movement. What had begun as one farmer's struggle to maintain family land had expanded into participation in a worldwide effort to transform agricultural systems for greater resilience and sustainability. The third spring since Sophia's fateful visit arrived with a sense of renewal appropriate to the season. The internship program had expanded to accommodate 10 students, with graduates from the previous years returning as guest instructors to share their experiences implementing Wildroot methods in different contexts. The workshop schedule was fully booked 6 months in advance, with participants coming from across the United States and beyond. The university partnership had yielded several promising research projects, including a comprehensive soil health study that quantified the benefits of Wildroot's compost system. Most significantly for James personally, both of his children had become actively involved in the farm's operations. Robert had indeed moved back to the area, buying a house in town and dividing his time between remote work for his accounting firm and managing Wildroot's increasingly complex finances. Lisa and her husband were planning to relocate that summer, with Lisa developing a health education component for the farm's programming while continuing her nursing career at the local hospital. On a perfect spring morning, with apple blossoms drifting like snow across the orchard, James walked the perimeter of his property with Sophia, who had returned to document the farm's continuing evolution. 3 years had passed since their first meeting, and their professional relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship. They corresponded regularly about the network of traditional farmers they were building, which now included over 100 operations across North America. "I never imagined any of this," James admitted, as they paused at the crest of a small hill overlooking the farm. Below them, interns worked in the expanded garden plots. A group of workshop participants toured the new seed-saving facility, and university students collected samples for their research project. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it must be some kind of dream." "Not a dream," Sophia smiled. "Just a different reality than the one you were trapped in before. The potential was always here, it just needed to be recognized." "By you," James pointed out. "I just happened to be the one who walked past that day," she countered. "The real value was created by generations of your family, maintaining these practices when it would have been easier to abandon them." They continued their walk in companionable silence, eventually arriving at the original compost bins that had first caught Sophia's attention. The system had been expanded and refined, but remained fundamentally the same practical, low-tech approach to transforming waste into fertility. "It all started here," Sophia observed, gesturing toward the wooden bins. "This humble pile of decomposing vegetables." James nodded, running a weathered hand along the edge of one bin. "My father built the first version of these when I was a boy. Said the heart of farming is returning to the soil what you take from it. Everything else follows from that principle." "Wise man, your father, your father." "He was," James agreed. "I wish he could see all this, how his knowledge is being passed on, not just to our family but to so many others." "He'd be proud," Sophia said with certainty. "Not just of the farm's success, but of how you've opened it up to the world." As they completed their circuit and approached the farmhouse, James noticed a sleek black car pulling into the parking area. Not the typical vehicle for workshop participants or interns, who tended toward practical trucks and economical sedans. A man in a business suit emerged, looking slightly out of place amid the agricultural setting. "Are you expecting someone?" Sophia asked, noticing the direction of James's gaze. "Not that I know of," he replied. "Let's go see what brings a suit to Wildroot Farm." The visitor introduced himself as Michael Donovan, representative of a major food corporation that had recently committed to transitioning its supply chain toward more sustainable sources. The company was exploring partnerships with farms that could both supply products and serve as training grounds for conventional farmers interested in adopting sustainable practices. "Our research team has been following Wildroot Farm's development with great interest," Donovan explained as they sat on the farmhouse porch. "The combination of traditional methods and innovative education you've developed here represents exactly the kind of model we're looking to support." He outlined a potential partnership that would include purchasing heritage varieties grown at Wildroot for the company's new premium product line, funding expanded educational programs for farmers in the company's supply network, and providing resources to document Wildroot's methods for broader dissemination. "We're prepared to make a significant investment," Donovan concluded, naming a figure that dwarfed even the generous grant from the Gaia Foundation. "In return, we would want Wildroot Farm to serve as a flagship example in our sustainability initiative, hosting visitors from our company and participating in our promotional materials." James listened carefully, aware of both the opportunities and potential pitfalls in such an arrangement. The resources offered would allow Wildroot to expand its impact dramatically, potentially influencing agricultural practices on a much larger scale. But corporate partnerships also carried risks of compromised independence, diluted values, or superficial greenwashing that adopted the language of sustainability without its substance. "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Donovan," James said after the representative had completed his presentation. "What you're proposing could certainly accelerate the work we're doing here. But before we discuss this further, I'd like to understand more about your company's broader commitment to sustainability. Is this a marketing initiative or a fundamental shift in how you approach food production?" Donovan seemed taken aback by the directness of the question, but recovered quickly. "That's a fair challenge," he acknowledged. "The truth is, it's both. Our marketing department certainly sees the value in associating our brand with authentic sustainability, but there's also a growing recognition at the executive level that our current supply chain model isn't resilient enough to weather the challenges coming our way: climate disruptions, water scarcity, soil degradation. What began as a branding exercise has evolved into a strategic priority." End quote. James nodded, appreciating the honesty. "I'd like to discuss this with my team before making any decisions. What you're proposing could be valuable, but we'd need to ensure it aligns with our core values and long-term vision for the farm." "Of course," Donovan agreed, handing James a folder containing the detailed proposal. "Take whatever time you need. We're serious about this partnership and want it to work for all parties involved." After the representative departed, James and Sophia spent hours discussing the opportunities and challenges presented by the corporate interest. They were joined by Maria, Robert, and several of the senior interns, each bringing different perspectives to the conversation. "This could exponentially increase our impact," Maria argued enthusiastically. "Imagine being able to influence the practices of a major food corporation, reaching consumers and farmers far beyond what we could achieve independently." "But at what cost?" countered Y, one of the original interns who now served as the farm's ecology specialist. "Corporate partnerships often come with pressure to compromise. What happens when economic considerations conflict with ecological ones?" Robert, always the pragmatist, focused on the financial aspects. "The funding would secure Wildroot's future for generations," he pointed out. "We could expand programs, improve infrastructure, offer more scholarships for farmers who couldn't otherwise afford to learn here." The discussion continued late into the evening, weighing potential benefits against possible risks. Throughout the conversation, James remained largely quiet, listening to the diverse perspectives and reflecting on the path that had brought Wildroot Farm to this juncture. 3 years ago, he had been a struggling farmer trying to preserve traditional methods in an economic system that devalued them. Now, those same methods were being recognized not just for their environmental benefits, but for their potential economic value in a changing world. The irony wasn't lost on him. As the discussion wound down without a clear consensus, James finally spoke up. When my great-grandfather started this farm, his goal was simple: to create a place where his family could thrive while caring for the land. Each generation since has had to adapt to changing conditions while holding on to that core purpose. He looked around at the circle of faces: his son, the young farmers who'd become part of the Wildroot community, and Sophia, whose chance visit had catalyzed this extraordinary transformation. I think our answer lies in staying true to that purpose, even as we explore new possibilities, he continued. We can engage with this company and others like it, but on terms that preserve our independence and our values. We can be partners without being dependent, influential without being compromised. The following morning, James called Michael Donovan to propose a modified arrangement. Wildroot would partner with the corporation on educational initiatives and limited supply agreements, but would maintain its independence and the right to work with other organizations. The farm would serve as one of several sustainable agriculture models in the company's initiative, rather than an exclusive flagship. Financial support would be directed primarily toward educational programs and research that would benefit the broader agricultural community, not just Wildroot Farm or its corporate partner. To James's surprise, Donovan received these counterproposals with enthusiasm. This actually aligns better with our longer-term strategy, he explained. We don't want to be seen as owning sustainability. We want to be part of a broader movement toward more resilient food systems. Your approach maintains your credibility, which ultimately benefits us as well. Over the following months, the partnership developed along the lines James had proposed. Wildroot Farm became one hub in a growing network of demonstration sites, each showcasing different approaches to sustainable agriculture adapted to specific regional conditions. The corporate funding allowed for expanded educational programs, including scholarships for conventional farmers interested in transitioning to more sustainable methods, and supported research documenting the economic and ecological benefits of traditional farming practices. As summer turned to fall, James found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 3 years. What had begun with a chance encounter between a struggling farmer and a curious camper had evolved into something neither could be. Have imagined a revitalized farm at the center of a movement reconnecting traditional agricultural wisdom with contemporary challenges. On a golden October afternoon, as the maple trees blazed with autumn color and the air carried the sweet scent of ripening apples, James sat on his porch, watching his grandchildren play in the yard. His daughter Lisa and her family had completed their move to the area, settling into a renovated farmhouse on an adjacent property that James had been able to purchase with part of the foundation grant. His son Robert's wife was expecting their first child in the spring, another generation that would grow up connected to this land and its traditions. Sophia joined him on the porch, having arrived that morning to film a segment for a documentary about the network of traditional farmers they had built together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children chase butterflies through the herb garden. When I first showed you my compost system, James said finally, I told you it was nothing special. Just a practical solution to a practical problem. Sophia smiled, remembering. And I said that's exactly what made it special. You were right, James acknowledged. The most valuable solutions aren't always the most complex or expensive. Sometimes, they're the simple ones, developed through necessity and refined through experience. That's the message that resonates with people. Sophia agreed. Sustainability doesn't have to be complicated or out of reach. It can be as straightforward as returning to the soil what we take from it, as your father taught you. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land that had been in his family for generations, James felt a deep sense of contentment. The farm that had once seemed a burden, tying him to an unsustainable past, had become a bridge to a more hopeful future. Not just for his family, but for the broader community of farmers and food producers seeking a more resilient path forward. I never set out to change the world, he reflected. I was just trying to hold on to this piece of it, to honor what my ancestors built here. Sometimes the most profound changes start that way, Sophia replied. Not with grand ambitions, but with simple acts of preservation and care. In the distance, the workshop participants could be seen returning from their afternoon session in the fields, talking animatedly among themselves. The interns were finishing their daily chores, the animals were being settled for the night, and the rhythm of the farm continued its ancient, eternal cicala cycle, now recognized not as an anachronism from a bygone era, but as a model for a more sustainable future. James Wilson, once a struggling farmer showing a curious camper his humble compost system, had become something he never anticipated. A keeper of essential knowledge, a bridge between agricultural traditions and contemporary challenges, a catalyst for change in a world increasingly recognizing the wisdom in traditional practices. And it had all begun with a chance encounter on a spring morning, when a global sustainability influencer had paused along a hiking trail, noticed something special in an ordinary farm, and stopped to ask questions about a simple pile of decomposing vegetables. In the gathering twilight, as lights came on in the farmhouse, and the voices of the next generation echoed across the land he had worked all his life, James Wilson knew with quiet certainty that the legacy of Wildroot Farm would continue not just through his family, but through the countless others who had come to learn here and had carried that knowledge back to their own communities around the world. The struggling farm had found not just survival but renewal, becoming part of a growing movement reconnecting humanity with the wisdom of generations past, wisdom that might just help us navigate the challenges of an uncertain future. And it had all started with compost, that humble, miraculous process of transformation, turning what is discarded into something essential, breaking down the old to nourish the new, completing a circle that had sustained life on Earth long before humans began to cultivate the soil, and would continue long after our brief tenure as its stewards had ended. In the simplicity of that natural cycle, James had found not just a farming method, but a philosophy, a way of understanding humanity's place in the greater web of life, not as conquerors or controllers, but as participants in an ancient, ongoing collaboration between humans and the natural world. As darkness fell over Wildroot Farm, James Wilson, the unlikely agricultural celebrity, rose from his porch chair and headed inside to join his family for dinner, grateful for the strange and wonderful journey that had brought him here, and hopeful for the journeys yet to come.